formally welcome everybody to what is the 6th external speaker session. We're very excited today to have Professor Kanika Mahajan with us. For people who are not a part of the group, I'll start with a very brief introduction about the group and then move into introduction about the speaker. So Women in Econ Policy is an initiative by Prerna and Prashansa, who are both RAs at JPAL South Asia currently. It was set up with an intention to create an inclusive space for women interested in econ and policy to learn from each other, network, collaborate, and so on. The group consists of women from various experiences, ages, and backgrounds who share a common interest in economics, development, and policy issues. We're very excited to announce that group membership recently crossed 500. So yeah, and if you want any more information, please visit the group's Twitter page or website, or you can reach out to Prerna, Prashansa, or any other members that you know directly to hear more about sort of what's happening. Moving on to introducing the speaker today. Dr. Kanika Mahajan is an assistant professor of economics at Ashoka University. Her primary research interests are in development economics in the field of gender, labor, agriculture, and environment. She has a lot of very interesting and relevant work, with recent work including, which is at the intersection of gender and labor, that looks into the stagnation of women's labor supply in urban India and change in female employment in rural areas due to technology and productivity shocks in agriculture. She's also looked at factors that affect violence against women, specifically examining the role of liquor sale policies and provision of in-home toilets. Today, for the session, we'll be following a structure where Professor Mahajan will spend about the first 35 to 40 minutes presenting a recent paper that deals with gender and jobs, particularly on exploring the demand side in India. And then we'll spend about the last 20 to 25 minutes for open Q&A, both about the paper that she's presented, but also other questions pertaining to pursuing original research work in economics and policy, building research collaborations, and applying to full-time and part-time research opportunities. So feel free to ask those questions towards the end. Professor, would you like, for the paper presentation itself, would you like to take questions as we go, or perhaps all at the end?
So I think it's best to take any clarificatory questions as we go along. And then if there are any, if there are bigger questions that you want to raise, maybe we can wait till the end.
Sounds great. Okay. And then before I hand over, just a few quick sort of housekeeping rules. This session is being recorded. Secondly, please leave your mic on mute throughout the course of the session. You can add questions to the chat box. If these are clarificatory questions about what is being presented, feel free to add them to the chat box as we go along. We will be monitoring the chat box and we will raise these questions as we go. At the end of the session, during the open Q&A session, you can indicate that you want to ask a question by raising your hand or using the raising your hand function, and then we will ask you to unmute yourselves and ask questions directly in the last 20 to 25 minutes, which will be the Q&A section. So yeah, that's it from my end. Over to you, Professor. Thanks once again. Oops, I think you're on mute.
Yeah. Let me just. Okay, can all see my screen?
Yes. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so thanks for inviting me. It's I've seen this group, I've seen its activity online, but yeah, it's I never got to know about it in detail. So yeah, it's good to be here and to be here with all of you, since I work in the area of gender also largely. So it's close to my heart, and I think you've done an excellent initiative in that regard. So congrats, and yeah, so that's the first thing I wanted to tell you guys. So the presentation that I'm going to have today, it's going to largely deal with the demand side of the labor market, and how our research shows that it could possibly be having some effect on women's labor force participation in India. So currently, I have 3 papers which are looking at the demand side. The first paper here is looking at the demand side in the agricultural sector, and we're specifically looking at technological change and how technological change can affect men and women differently in agriculture, and we are specifically looking at mechanization in agriculture production process. The second paper deals with the demand shocks that come through climatic shocks, again in the agriculture sector, and how they can possibly be having differential effects on men and women, not only in their labor input use in agriculture, but also how they cope up with these demand shocks in terms of the diversification opportunities available to them when such demand shocks hit the agricultural sector. In the last paper, we are looking at the urban labor market. And in this paper, we are using an online job portal data to look at what are the kinds of jobs that specifically require men and specifically require women. What's the nature of these jobs? And how applicants are applying to jobs in response to such requests being made by the employer. So these are some of the angles or strands that we're looking at in our research. The paper that I'm going to focus in today's talk is the first one largely, and I'll talk a bit about the third paper, but that's very little that I'll talk about in today's talk. But feel free to ask me more questions later if you want to know more about any of these papers. Okay, so let me get into the first one. It's co-authored with Farzana Afridi and Monisankar Vishnu at ISI Delhi. And the reason why we got interested in this question is that over time, we know that farm sector employment is falling in India, and it's a part of general, structural transformation kind of a process where people move from the farm sector into the non-farm sector. However, if you look at women's involvement in agriculture, out of the total labor force in agriculture in 1999, women were about 36% of the total labor force, whereas in 2011, they had fallen to 32%. So over time, their involvement is falling, and they've borne a greater brunt of this, fall in employment in the agriculture sector. There could be both push and pull factors which could be responsible. As I said, that non-farm sector could in general move people out of the farm sector. However, there could also be push factors from the agriculture sector which could also lead people to move away from agriculture. And one of the examples of a push factor can be agricultural mechanization. If one looks at how tractor penetration is changing over time in India, there has been an exponential increase since the year 2000. Before that, between 1990 to 2000, there was only a million increase in number of tractors. But in the second decade, from 2000 to 2011, it almost tripled, and it increased by 4 million. So largely, this increase was on account of greater subsidies being offered on agricultural machinery, as well as agriculture credit policies, which led to a big offtake in the credit market in the agriculture sector. So our question really is that, has this increased adoption of mechanical power have any gender differentiated impacts on labor use in the agriculture sector? So here we plot the total labor use per hectare of land per hectare of cultivated land in the agriculture sector. And we see that for men, which is the solid line, it's been pretty flat over the time. And we plotted using the different NSS rounds from 1999 to 2011. Whereas if we look at for women, here we've indexed the year 1999 to 100, and then we're looking at changes over time. There's been a steep fall in the use of women's labor in the agriculture sector during this. At the same time, if we look at how the sources of power in the agriculture sector are changing. So here the dashed line represents sources of power which are operated by diesel or electricity implements which are run on them, whereas we have hand operated implements that are used by hand, and animal operated, which are pulled or pushed by animals or operated by animals. If we look at their their evolution over time, what we find is that there's been a decline for the animal operated and the hand operated implements, but the power operated implements have seen a steep increase since 1999. So to understand how mechanization process works in agriculture, it's important to understand the agri production process. So let me give you some idea about the production process in agriculture itself. So largely there are three stages of production. The first stage is land preparation, which largely involves plowing, within which there are two types of tilling: primary tilling, which is the deep tilling, and then we have the secondary tilling, which is the shallow tilling. Then in stage two, we have processes of sowing and intercultural operations like weeding, fertilizing, irrigation happens throughout the process. And stage three are the harvesting and threshing operations. So once the crop is out there in the field. Agriculture implements, as I just showed, can be classified into three sources of power: operated by hand, operated by animals, or operated by power. And those which are operated by power are generally driven by a tractor or a power tiller. That is the source of power for the implement, or just self-propelled. So something like a combine harvester is a self-propelled machine. It has its own source of power. Whereas attachments that you see behind the tractors are driven by the tractor. So the source of power really is the tractor itself. And mechanization is defined as a process in which more of power operated implements are adopted in agriculture. Now, how are these adopted? Now, which stage they get adopted in depends on the extent of physical strength required for that stage. So, for instance, tilling requires maximum power. So, tilling or stage one is the first stage to get mechanized. Then comes harvesting, because then that's the next power intensive operation. And stage two, which is the sowing or the weeding part, is mechanized in the, it's the last one to be mechanized in general, because it's more of a precision based activity. It's only when you have really labor cases that you would get into stage two mechanization. And here I'm excluding irrigation equipment, etc., because those are in general used for different purposes and they have largely a labor augmenting effect. And we also exclude tractors and power tillers from our definition of implements, because again, they just provide a source of power. Eventually, you need implements to be able to do a particular type of task, and these tractors and power tillers can actually provide a source of power across operations. It's not that they're only limited to a particular operation. We then sum up the area under all implements, which are used for either of the types of power source and for each operation. So we have these input data from the input census rounds, and the district level data actually starts from 1908-99. And we've used these input census rounds to then make these calculations. So let me now show you how these look like. So after classifying these implements into these different types of operations and then we look at how they're changing over time. So we see that again, as one would expect, it's primary tilling which has seen the maximum increase, and then secondary tilling has seen an increase. Then after stage one and stage two, it's actually stage three which has seen the maximum increase or take up of machines over time. If you look at stage two operations, then there's been some increase in sowing, which is actually mostly driven by a tiller and sower. So there are some machines which can do tilling as well as sowing, and that increase, largely comes from a tiller comes sower in this case. Whereas in stage two, there is actually no mechanization in India so far. So how does then we just look at these plots? What is the what's the correlation in some sense between labor use and implement use? So these are the district level bins that we've plotted, and we can clearly see that districts where on an average there is greater implement use per unit of area cultivated. We also find that there is there is smaller labor use in these districts as the implement use increases. It's same for men and women. In fact, for men, it's actually more steeper than it is for women when we look at these simple correlational plots. If you think theoretically, any kind of machine use or uptake can have two types of effects. It can have a labor augmenting effect. A machine like pumps or irrigation sets would have such an effect where the demand for labor actually increases because you're increasing the productivity. And hence you're increasing the demand for labor. However, other machine use, which is labor substituting in nature, can have labor displacement effects. So whether a machine use in agriculture has a labor displacement or an augmenting effect depends on the operation which is being mechanized. And in then it'll also depend on the effect on agricultural productivity of mechanization of that operation. In this paper, what we're going to concentrate on is mechanization in stage 1 for India. And as I said, that stage 1 largely constitutes of primary tilling and secondary tilling. And the machines used for primary tilling are moldboard plows, rotavators, cultivators, whereas in secondary tilling, we have disc harrows, gauge wheels, and levelers. Why we look at only stage 1? Well, the reason is we are able to only find an instrument for stage 1, which is convincing enough for us, and hopefully we can convince you as well. We leave out the harvesters and threshers from here because, as I said, we're not able to convincingly find a suitable instrument for that. So we also have a theoretical model in the paper. I'm not going to go into the details of the theoretical model for this talk. But we show in that theoretical model, we derive the conditions under which a general, a technological change in general can have differential effects on male and female labor use. We set up a production function, agriculture, decompose the labor into 2 types of labor, male and female labor. And our analysis shows that in general, one of the strictest conditions that you require for any technological change to have this gender differentiated impact is for men and women to be imperfect substitutes. Now, if they're perfect substitutes, then intuitively, if they can be substituted 1-to-1, then there is no reason why intuitively why you would, if the factor markets are operating perfectly, that you would see any gender differentiated impacts or any differential effect on labor use of male labor versus female labor. In fact, one can think of it in a very general model as well, where you have skilled and unskilled labor. And when there is automation happening, such a technological change will affect skilled and unskilled labor differently depending on how they are being brought together in the production process and which type of labor is being affected more by a particular technological change. So, but just to tell you what's the highlight of that theoretical model that we come up is that is that we really need male and female labor to be imperfect substitutes. So what I'll do now is just make you, show you how this can happen in an agriculture production process. Before that, just to tell you a brief about literature about which has looked at the labor impacts of mechanization. So there is some literature in agriculture which has looked at the angle of how increased mechanization affects labor use. And there has also been a review of these many studies which have been taken, which were largely done in 80s and 90s actually. There's no really recent paper which has looked at such a question. But all of these studies, they don't look at the gender differentiated impact, and they usually report labor use fall in terms of average labor use per hectare. And the 2 operations which they find large labor reductions for are the operations of land preparation, which is stage 1, and the operation of weeding, which is a part of stage 2. Why weeding, you may wonder? Well, weeding because if you till the land well enough, the weed growth is less. So you require less of labor to take out the weeds when the crop is growing. And these weeds, it's important to remove them. It's important for the productivity of your yield, because otherwise these weeds will take the nutrients from the soil and not allow the crop to grow to its full potential. And that's why it's important to remove these weeds when they grow along with the crop that the farmer has sown. Okay. So coming to what we exactly do in the paper, the question, as I said before, is looking at mechanization in stage 1 of agricultural operations and looking at its effect on labor use, and specifically looking at how it affects men and women labor use differentially. We employ an instrumental wearable strategy here to deal with the indigeneity in use of machines for stage 1. And here we link the soil texture of an area with the deep tillage requirements in that area, and hence how there may be a differential use of implements across areas with different soil textures. Broadly, our findings show that there has been a significant reduction in labor use per unit of land cultivated for women. There's also been reduction for men, but we don't find significant effects here. So largely the fall in male labor is driven by the family labor actually, which is somewhat compensated by the increase in hired labor, as I'll show to you later. And we rule out, we rule out some other factors that could possibly be driving our results. Now, what is the mechanism through which mechanization and land preparation can affect labor use? So as I said, there can be a direct effect where you have labor substitution happening with the machines are coming in. These implements like mold-board plows are being used. You don't need as much labor as you would require earlier, and hence it's a direct substitution of machines for labor. There can be indirect substitution if there are complementarities across tasks. And here we are specifically looking at complementarities across tasks of land preparation and weeding. As I mentioned before, deep tillage improves the quality of land. It reduces weed growth. And so you require lower weeding labor. And that's the indirect effect that mechanization in stage 1 can have on labor use. Just to show you how the gender composition varies across agricultural tasks in India. So stage 1, which is plowing, only about 9% of the total labor used in plowing is provided by women. In sowing, it's 33%. Weeding, it's almost 40% labor that's provided by women. And in harvesting, it's around 30%. To carry this analysis, we compile a host, we compile district level data from a host of sources. For soil characteristics, we actually digitize ourselves the soil maps of India to get very, very detailed information on certain characteristics of soils. We use the agricultural input censuses of 97, 98, 67, and 2011-12 to get district level data on implement use. Unfortunately, the district level data is not available prior to 97, 99 round. Otherwise, we could have gone back further as well. So corresponding to these rounds, we take the employment data from the National Sample Survey of the rounds 1999, 2007, 2011. We have these other controls in our analysis from different sources.
I have a quick question. Sorry,
yes.
This is perhaps also coming up, but I was just wondering within soil type, as somebody who has not sort of read too many agricultural econ papers, is crop composition also considerably variable within soil type? And then does that link to female sort of labor force? Does that also link to women's involvement in agricultural labor, or is that not the case? Like crop composition?
So crop composition plays a very important role actually, and that's why we want to control for it in our analysis.
Right,
so crop composition can vary because of soil suitability, but we also know that crop composition now also responds to many of the institutional factors like MSPs in India.
Right.
That's why we want to control for crop composition. So for example, Punjab is not suitable for rice cultivation, but groundwater is exploited in Punjab because of rice MSP.
Got it.
Let's not get into that. Okay, so just to give you a brief overview of how we really digitize these maps, this is how a map looked like, which we obtained from the National Bureau of Soil Survey, and then we got geographers to actually digitize this using CAD in GIS, and then extract the properties of each of these small areas that was provided to us in another file that maps each area, each code to its soil properties. Then we overlaid the district maps boundaries over these digitized maps, and then extracted the detailed characteristics of soils at the district level, which we then use in our analysis. So this is how it looked like. So we are going to use surface texture as our instrument, which is loaminess and clayiness. And essentially, we're going to use the difference in loamy and clay proportions as the instrument here. Because greater loaminess, you need more of primary tilling, which is deep tilling, which needs these primary tilling equipments. Whereas in clay soils, primary tilling doesn't really help. So you don't want to do primary tilling there. You want to just go for shallow tilling there. Okay, so we have sufficient variation. So we're going to identify the variation within the states. And we see that we are able to see sufficient variation in the soil texture within the states in our analysis. Sorry. Okay. I've already talked about this. Let me just show you the map for mechanization using the 2011 input census. Again, we see that there is a lot of mechanization, especially in Punjab, Rajasthan area, but there is sufficient variation within each state to get the variation that we require. These are some of the summary stats for the main variables. We have the labor use variables for females and for males. And we have the mechanization variables here. We see that the same trends that I had shown you earlier also hold out in the general summary stats here. Let me move on to, okay, so these are some of the controls that we require, that we actually use in our analysis. I will actually detail these controls later when I talk about the instrument exogeneity. So let me just straight away come to the IV estimation strategy here. So our main equation really is relating the labor use in agriculture, which is our dependent variable L, in district D in state S at time T. G is a type of labor, either male or female labor. And we're seeing the effect of mechanization on labor use, controlling for these X's. Some of them are for male and female separately. So we have controls for education that are separate for men and women. And we also control for initial labor use, as I will argue. So in all our specifications, we control for labor use in the year 1993 to argue the instrument exogeneity in our case. We have other district level characteristics that we're using. We specifically want to control for these characteristics like the level of development in an area. So we want to control for urbanization, approach roads, night lights, irrigated area, the average land size, which could also affect use of labor, use of mechanized inputs. And then we have state fixed effects and time fixed effects, since we're pulling in 3 rounds of data for the 3 years. And since we know mechanization is going to be endogenous, why is mechanization endogenous? Because areas which are likely to see more mechanization are the areas which could just be seeing more of non-farm sector growing, and hence you have this labor pull happening, and hence people could move into mechanization because of this labor pull happening from the non-farm sector. And that's something that we don't want. We want an exogenous factor that leads to uptake of machines in stage 1 and not labor pull factors. So what we do is, in the first stage, we instrument the level of mechanization in a district with the extent of loaminess in that in the soil of that district, which is basically the difference between the loamy and the clay soil content. We then use the same controls as we have in our second stage specification. Okay. I've already mentioned some of these, but let me just reiterate them, that why we are able to use loaminess as an instrument in stage 1 is because the requirement of deep tilling is more in loamy soils and can be done better in loamy soils as compared to clay soils. And primary tilling or deep tilling requires at least 45 centimeters of the soil to be turned over, and it's usually followed by shallow tilling, in which you don't turn the soil as much. Some areas don't go for primary tilling at all, they just go for secondary tilling. So greater loamy soil content, more likely to use deep tilling equipment. And once you've adopted tractors for deep tillage, actually, it's very cost effective to just use an attachment for shallow tilling as well. Why you would? Because the major cost is actually tractor purchase. And then these implements which are attached behind the tractor, either for primary tilling or for shallow tilling, are not that expensive. So they're about 1/10 or 1/12 of the cost of a tractor to buy these implements, and even you can even buy cheaper implements if you go for Indian companies. So generally you see that tractor-driven implements are adopted once a tractor itself has been adopted in an area. Okay, so just to argue for instrument exogeneity, we look at what's happening before the real increase in mechanization happened in the country. We look at how labor use per hectare responds to loneliness before 1999. Here we use the labor use from NSS survey of 1993. We find that there are no differential effects in 1993 across areas with more loneliness or less loneliness. There is no differential, differential variation across wage rates or per capita consumption expenditure, which would create, some sort of worry about incomes being different across loamy and clay content soils. The cropping patterns are also very similar, and so are the yields across these areas. So so there is some initial balance on these important characteristics that we would have liked to have balance on across loamy and non-loamy areas. As I argue that there may be some concern that literature has shown that areas which historically are more disadvantaged for women, they can have consequences over time. And if deep tillage is something that is very is important in loamy areas, and that requires more physical strength. So again, these areas can have some sort of norms through which women are more disadvantaged. So it's important to actually, we've checked that in 1996 that was not the case, but we still control for the initial labor use for both men and women in the respective specification in both the second stage and the first stage, to rule that norms are driving our results that we see in our main specification. Okay, so these are just the OLS estimates actually, and these are, as we know, are endogenous, and as one would expect that here mechanization has a greater negative effect on men rather than women, and this is largely driven by the pull factors as I just mentioned. So let me go to the first stage and the second stage results directly. In the first stage, we find that our instrument is actually doing a pretty good job of positively relating to mechanization in stage 1. The FCAT is low, but we do a weak IV test, and it goes through. Let me go to the second stage results. Here we find that increase in mechanization reduces female labor use per unit of cultivated area by approximately 0.7%. Our dependent variable is an inverse hyperbolic sign transformation variable to take into account the zeros that are possible. Specifically, about 10 districts have 0 female labor force participation, and we want to maintain the same number of observations to be able to do this chi-square test here. And that's the reason why we end up using such a transformation. One could also use a log and we get similar results actually. Whereas the sign is negative, but not significant for men. And if we do a chi-square test to test for these two coefficients, we find that these signs are indeed, these coefficients are different from each other. And there's a greater negative effect of increased mechanization on female labor use. We check for robustness for time trends through initial employment as well as just within states over time. Now to look at the mechanism, we actually look at what's happening at the operation level. So as I just said, that one would expect largely either the mechanism to operate through the through labor fall in tilling or through labor fall in weeding. Now we know that women are not as much involved in tilling as they are in weeding, and their labor use is the one that's falling the most. So intuitively, one would expect that weeding should be the operation that gets affected more. And that's actually confirmed in our operational level analysis when we find that the only, for women, the only significant operation that's seen a fall is weeding. For men, it's across operations that we see a fall actually. And let me show you actually the fall when we look at when we actually rule out these two other factors that can possibly also accompany mechanization. So when mechanization happens, if productivity increases happen, you can expect rise in incomes. And when incomes rise, then you can expect that women withdraw from the labor force. There could be other concerns that our instrument is related to direct structural transformation from farm to non-farm sector, and that could lead to our results being contaminated through an indirect factor. So I address them. And to address them, what we do is that we look at family labor and hired labor differently, okay? Both female and male labor. And we look at it across these 4 operations. Now, if labor incomes being increasing is the reason why for women withdrawing, then that should largely happen for family labor and not for hired labor. But we see that weeding labor use is actually falling both for family and for hired labor for women. Let's look at the same for men. Okay. That slide is not here for some reason. But largely for men, what we had found was that there is a fall in weeding for men also. But there is actually a slight rise for men in tilling rather than a fall. And that's what's leading to this divergent effect. And overall, we don't find a significantly negative effect because more of hired labor is now being used for the tilling operation for men. So they're using more of hired labor to probably drive these tractors actually. Okay. Then to rule out other factors that could be correlated with structural transformation of an area, we look at employment in other sectors for men specifically, and here we don't find any effect of mechanization on employment in these other sectors. We also look at it for women, and for women again there is no effect, and which actually points out that women are moving away from agriculture but not able to find jobs, alternative jobs in the non-agriculture sector really, which is a double whammy for them in some sense. Another check that we do is that we actually look at the effect of loneliness on adoption of equipment in sowing and harvesting tasks. Now, sowing has some component that's coming from these tilling machines, so there is some positive effect, but harvesting machines, which are 90% self-propelled in India, we actually find no effect of loneliness on adoption of such machines, which again gives more weight to our instrumental wearable strategy. We look at other effects of mechanization, which I will not discuss now, but we have these in our paper, and we discuss the effect of mechanization, not just on labor use, but how it can in general have productivity enhancing effects, which could possibly lead to increase in wages along with reducing the demand for labor. Overall, if we take the estimates that we find in this paper, the overall reduction that we've seen in women's labor use in agriculture over time during this time period of 1999 to 2011, there's a 32 percentage point increase in mechanization during this period, and this can actually, this has actually led to a 22% reduction in women's labor use in agriculture, and out of the total reduction, this is explaining about 70% of the total fall that we see for women's labor use in agriculture. So I guess this paper has provided some evidence that technological change can have gendered effects, and it's important to look at these gendered effects when we have a production function where men and women can be imperfect substitutes for each other. The second paper that I'm going to very briefly talk about, given the time constraints that we have, I'm not going to take more than 5 minutes here. It's again joint work with Sugat at ISI Delhi and with Zara at University of Bristol. What we largely do in this paper is that we look at the jobs posted on an online job portal during this 1.5 year period. We look at which of these job ads, we actually cull this information out from the job description, because there is no explicit field on the job portal that allows you to enter your gender preference. But employers state, they can state which gender they prefer in the job description. So we cull this information out for about these 2 million jobs, about 0.2 million, so about 2 lakh jobs. And we see which are the types of jobs which are having a particular gendered request in place. What are the implications of these gendered requests on wages which are being offered on these jobs? Then what we do is that we use these explicit gender requests in these job ads, and we use and then we undertake a textual analysis to see what type of job text in the job description is associated with this explicit preference for a particular gender. And then for jobs which don't have a particular explicit preference, we try to predict what's the implicit preference and implicit gendered preference specifically in these jobs. And the third thing we do in this project is that we also specifically, uncover or take out words in the job descriptions that are actually associated with these gender requests. So let me just show you some visual snapshots of the work that we've done so far. So this is the job. So this is the word cloud of the job titles where we find specific requests for women. So largely they're dominated by HR positions, office assistants, executives, receptionists, teachers, telecallers, front desk managers. Typical kind of occupations that you would expect being targeted at women. And if you look at the jobs that explicitly target men, you'll see more of sales jobs or delivery jobs or office boy jobs. Some management jobs are also there, marketing jobs, customer support. A lot of these jobs, business development, are being targeted towards men. And jobs that don't request any gender are largely these executive, marketing, business, sales, content writers. There are more balance in terms of not having per se a gender request. And as what we did next was that we looked at the applicant shares. So we look at the jobs that have such gender requests, and there we find that there is sort of a negative skill targeting relationship. So jobs which are likely to be on the lower skill spectrum are the ones that are more likely to express a gender request for either a male or a female to specifically apply for that job. But this reduces as you move on to the upper end of the skill spectrum. Uh, and then we look at how men and women, in terms of their applicant shares, are responding to both these explicit requests and how they're responding to the implicit associations that they may, associate with these jobs. Once we predict for a job, what is the likelihood of that job, having language that's gendered, and here we have, hey, so what we plot in these graphs is what's the proportion of female applicants in the first graph with the prediction of, what's the extent of femaleness that you get from the job description of that job. And here we're controlling for occupation fixed effects. So we have a detailed control of more than 500 occupations in our data. And what we find is that even after controlling for such occupation fixed effects, as you associate more of femaleness with a job, you see an increase in proportion of candidates which are women. And even for jobs that have a request for women, women are more likely to apply for these jobs, or as a proportion of the candidates more to these jobs, when even such jobs have a greater implicit association or have words that are typically or stereotypically more of which are typically regarded as female words or targeting towards women essentially. We also derive a word list which we have now in the paper, but I'm not showing it to you here because of lack of time. And we do the same for maleness. And again, we find here that the share of male applicants increases as the probability of the job text indicating that a particular job ad is for a male increases. So let me just stop here and let me now take questions if there are any.
Great. Thank you so much. We'll now open the floor for questions. So if anybody has any questions, just feel free to use the raise hand function and unmute yourselves one by one to ask. Go ahead and ask questions. Yeah, go ahead, Prachi.
Well, thank you. This was a great presentation. I learned a lot. Regarding your first paper, I had a question. Do you see the issue of land fragmentation affecting your model or your findings? And if yes, then how? And I have two more questions. So do I ask them now, or would you prefer that you answer one at a time?
Let me answer one at a time. I think it's just
Sure.
easy for me to keep a track. So yeah, on your first point, I think that's a very, very important point. And that's how we actually control for average farm size as a control variable, because we do see that areas which on an average have a higher farm size or a larger farm size are more likely to use these implements in agriculture. And over time, we know that land fragmentation has been happening. It happened at a greater pace between 1999 and 2007 actually, and then sort of the pace reduced from 2007 to 2011, but it was still there. But yes, that's a very important variable to control for, and hence we do include that in our analysis.
All right. And what really piqued my interest was your intuition behind both your papers. So, do you have something that you did as an undergrad econ student, or maybe later in the years, that helped you develop your intuition as a researcher, to be able to have, to be able to understand what kind of questions to be asking and all that stuff? Because I think largely our training focuses on how do we answer these questions, um, efficient through a good methodology maybe, but there's very little.
How do you ask questions?
Yeah, in short, yes.
That's the most difficult part actually, of any research agenda, of any research project. The most difficult part is actually asking the question. And once you've asked the question, then you can start thinking of methodologies to answer that question. And for the first part, the recommendation that I have is read as much as possible. Read, and then after you read something, think further about that thing. Just don't let your thoughts being driven by what you read. And someone long time back gave me a suggestion when I was actually working in the corporate sector and not in academia, but I think I found that suggestion very useful always, is that you always ask 3 whys to any question. And usually when you go 3 steps down, you usually get an answer to the question that you're trying to ask when it comes to the mechanism behind why you're seeing what you're seeing. Because frankly, in any paper, the most interesting part is not the patterns that you find. It's why are you finding those patterns that you see in your data. So once you see some pattern, when you start looking at data, don't stop at just, okay, this is the pattern and this is what we find. Ask 3 whys to yourself, try to answer them step by step, and that will give you a bigger paper, a bigger idea to look at, instead of just looking at patterns or just looking at descriptive. Of course, descriptive analysis is very important for giving you ideas. So don't stop doing that. Always do that before you go on to any paper.
Oh, that's great advice. And finally, regarding your second paper, so gig economy is now the buzz around, the platform economy is basically a new buzzword with economists and stuff. So, do you, in when you were factoring in for jobs, etc., did you find any gendered preference with specific to platform economy jobs? Um,
We've actually not looked at whether we have enough gig economy or platform economy jobs in the job set that we have, but I think it's a very good idea. We could look at it. If there are words like, there's no specific field that allows us to look at that, but I guess just the way we've looked at the job description, one could look at the job descriptions and see if there's some particular kinds of words which are being used to specifically bring out these gig economy kind of jobs. So that's a good idea actually. Thanks.
oh, great. Thank you. Thank you so much for answering my questions.
Thanks, Prachi.
We have one question in the chat box. So Abhimanyu, would you like to ask the question directly, or would we just refer to what's in the chat box?
Yeah, hi Kanika. What is the dependent variable in the first paper?
So in the first paper, the dependent variable is labor use or total females, which we get from NSS in the farm sector, divided by the cultivated area.
Divided by the area?
By the total area that's cultivated in a district, not just the total area of a district. So the cultivated area.
I see. So it's that variable on which the inverse hyperbolic sign transformation is applied, right?
Yes.
Did you show the summary statistics of that variable? Maybe I missed. Can I just have a look at that?
Yeah, so in the summary stats, I think I've not shown the values with the IHST transformation. I think these are summary stats. No, yeah. So here I've not applied the IHST transformation in these summary stats. These are just summary stats, which is total female labor used in the reference week in the NSS daily schedule divided by the cultivated area. And why we have to use the IHST transformation here, basically like anything that helps us overcome the problems of zeros is because around 10 districts had zero for female labor use, but positive for male labor use. And when we look at operation level results, they become even more sparse for some of the operations, especially tilling is like zero for women, almost like in 80% of the districts for India.
Because yeah, sorry, because I thought that the female share ranged from 9% to 40%. So I was surprised why there were so many zeros. That's what's
Yeah, because when you look at the district level, no, so for tilling, for example, you get like 0% of women reporting working in plowing using the daily status schedule of NSS. So
I
they're
see.
in the farm sector, but then just because there are very few women anyways working in tilling, you get a lot of zeros there. And you don't want to lose them, right? So either you add a very small value and you take a log. We tried that also, and then we took the IHST transformation also. They both actually give us very similar results. And for the overall, we even dropped the districts where there were zeros. And in fact, our results become even stronger when we use a simple log specification there.
I see.
Yeah, but yeah, that's an important question of why we chose that transformation in this context.
Okay, great. We're almost out of time. So if there are maybe any last questions, happy to take them.
Hello, can I ask one question? I am Dr. B. Pradeep Kumar from Kerala. Actually, it's a wonderful presentation. Actually, my questions are related to your first paper. I think you were trying to argue that mechanization in the farm sector has resulted in defeminization of the farm sector, or mechanization in the farm sector has led to a situation of a decline in female labor force participation in the farm sector. But contrary to that, what we see in Kerala is the feminization of the farm sector. Because when the men goes back from the farm sector, actually more women are seemed to be engaged in farming activities in Kerala, especially under the umbrella of this Kudumbashree, or a kind of self-help group program. The women are, they appear to be more actively engaged in the agriculture sector in all spheres of agriculture activities, not only in production, distribution, in controlling of the resources, they are more active. So, I mean, contrary to what you are trying to portray here, what I feel is that in Kerala, actually this mechanization has resulted in feminization of the farm sector rather than defeminization of the farm sector, as you have argued. And one more thing is that you might have heard about this feminization U hypothesis. That is something which is associated with the economic development of a country. And it is normal that when an economy enters into the second stage of that feminization U hypothesis, the involvement of women in the agriculture sector will be more. I think India is passing through a second stage of our progress or our development. So I think feminization of the farm sector can be seen in some more parts of our country, because when the male moves out of this farm sector in search of job in other areas, naturally more women might come forward to actively involve in the farm sector. I think there is feminization is happening rather than mechanization. Then one more thing, actually you have said that this mechanization has resulted in, of course, a decline in the female labor force participation rate, as you have pointed out in your article. My question is it the mechanization the only reason for the decline in female labor force participation in the farm sector? I think the women might be attracted by the other opportunities in other sectors. That is why they have moved away from the agriculture sector because comparably the wage in the agriculture sector may be less. So they might have moved away from the agriculture sector to other sectors. That perhaps one important reason for the decline in the female labor force participation rate. So did you use any control variable to explain these things? That's it. And also you have pointed out clearly that a 32% increase in mechanization has resulted in 22% decline in feminization of the farm sector. So my question is, how did you arrive at this exact figure of 32% increase in mechanization? On what basis you have actually calculated this 32-point increase in mechanization? What was the methodology which you applied it to come to that conclusion that a 32% increase in mechanization actually resulted in a 22% in decline in female labor for participation in the agriculture sector? Anyway, overall, your paper, I think it is very good because it has used a lot of analysis to come to these conclusions. Thank you.
Thanks for these questions. Let me just quickly address them. I didn't discuss actually one of our other papers that we did earlier on the decline in women's labor force in the rural sector for India. And there we've actually shown that a large part of the decline in women's labor force participation rates in India between 1980s and 90s can actually be explained largely by the income effects operating in India. But between late 1990s to 2011, a very small fraction, only about 15% or something, can actually be explained by these rising incomes. So a large part of this decline in women's labor force participation rate in rural India actually remains unexplained by these usual labor supply factors. That's the answer to your first question, that yes, in fact, your second question, that yes, there are other factors, but these other factors are not playing a very important role during the time period that we're looking at, and we've already established that in another companion paper. In the first point that you raised, that in fact there is feminization of labor force over time. So overall at the country level, we are not seeing that, at least post the 2000s. Yes, if you look at only the NSS rounds between 1999 and 2004, there was an increased feminization that we started seeing, but post 2004, we are again seeing a defeminization. But that's not to say that every district or every area is seeing a is seeing a defeminization or a feminization. Of course, there will be pockets in which there would be more, there would be increased feminization because of men migrating. That's a very different factor as compared to, say, mechanization. So these factors would be different in different pockets of the country, and I accept that in Kerala things could be different, but this is for the larger country using the data for about 400-500 districts. So these are the average patterns that we are seeing on an average. Then the other point that you raised was the non-farm sector leading to the pull away from agriculture for women. In fact, if you see the overall sectoral allocation for women's labor force participation and how it's changing over time, the entire literature that's shown that women's labor force participation in the rural India has fallen over time has shown that agriculture has fallen, manufacturing has been stable, construction has increased, is the only sector which has increased actually for women and for men, for both of them. But for women, the increase has been very little as compared to the increase for men in the construction sector. And the services sector, again, women, there's been a 1 percentage point increase and not much. So I'm not very sure if I'll agree with you on the pull factors. I think we really need to give more pull factors. We are really not doing enough on the non-farm sector side. Your last question on how we arrive at this, this figure that we do in our conclusion is that we look at the overall increase in mechanization using our implement use variable, which is the mechanization variable for stage 1. And we find that there's been so here I would actually like to draw a distinction that we see a 32 percentage point increase in mechanization leads to a 22%. So a percent is different from a percentage point. We are able to say 22% because we use the marginal effect that we've derived in our second stage specification, which is that for every 1 percentage point increase, we have a 0.7% fall for women's labor use. And we just multiply that by 32 percentage point increase and get approximately a 22% fall for women's labor use using that simple multiplication unitary method rule. So we've just picked up the marginal effect from our estimations and multiplied it with the total increase in mechanization during this time period to arrive at this final number.
Great, thank you. We have one last question from Karmini. So please go ahead and ask your question and then we'll end after.
Hi, thank you, Kanika. It was a great presentation. So I have one main question. So this is, well, I mean, it may be unfair, but it's regarding your second project that you showed us. So one of the things is that you said that it's a bit surprising that I think that you were showing that women were more likely to apply for jobs that had that were showing a greater preference for women. Is that true? Like there was an increased, so as you were moving towards the right, you were saying that women's share in the applications is increasing. So I was just wondering, the idea of the preference that you're getting at from the text analysis is also that those people are targeting those women, right? So I'm just trying to understand, why was that surprising?
No, it's not surprising, actually. What was surprising is this gap. So what I didn't expect is that, so suppose a job ad is requesting for a woman explicitly, okay? We prefer women, we would like to have a woman apply for this position, we would like to hire a woman. Suppose they're using these words. Now, even then, even when a job ad is saying that, okay? But a job ad, so there are these three types of job ads. In the green job ad, you have an explicit preference being put for women. Okay, I want a woman to come in for this job. In the gray ads, I'm not stating anything. I just have a job description. Okay. And the red ads, I'm actually saying I want a man. Now, once you get the implicit femaleness, now, even when I'm requesting for a woman, but if the implicit association of that job ad, if I remove the explicit request for a woman, okay, I take that part out. I use the other words in the job ad to predict the level of femaleness. Okay. Now, even then, you see this rise. If I'm explicitly requesting for a woman, I would expect that women in general would just apply more to such jobs, right? Why would I see this increase?
Right. So
yeah.
Okay. Got it. Yeah, got it. So I just one. So here there is no difference in the way that these employers are targeting those jobs at men or women. Is that?
Yeah. So we've taken out. So
okay.
To predict the implicit femaleness, we've taken out the words that specifically say that we want a man or we want a woman. We've taken them out, and then we use the remainder of the words to predict. So we've used the explicit preferences. So we have about 8% jobs which specifically request for a man or a woman. We train a model on these 8% jobs, okay? And then we use that trained model to predict for all the jobs, the likelihood of the words targeting a man or a woman in that job.
I see.
Hope I was a bit clear. I know I didn't go into the details of the
example. Yeah. No, that's okay. Just last point, Anahita, and I'll just keep quiet after that. So regarding the first project, I mean, even though you've addressed this to some extent, is that you mentioned Carranza's paper where loneliness can be associated with many other kinds of social norms, and you've controlled for, I think, 1993 levels of labor force participation of women. So I'm just wondering, would that be enough? I think norms is such an elusive concept in terms of measurement. Is that? Would there be alternative ways to capture it? Or would you have thought about it?
So here we are more concerned about norms that affect labor force participation. Of course, there could be norms about many other things, right? So that's why we think that, since we are more concerned about norms operating that affect women's labor force participation, we should, be able to argue for exogeneity by exactly controlling for the same dependent variable that we have. Okay, so it's exactly the same dependent variable, but we've controlled for its 1993 values before that increased mechanization offtake really happened. So we hope that we're able to convince you because that's a norm that we really care about, right? There could be, of course, hundreds of other norms that could be operating, as long as they're affecting labor force participation. And they've been doing that historically. And we're able to control for that using some initial base year for which we have data available. I think we should be able to do that. But we always know that IVs are subject to a lot of ambiguity.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Okay, so thank you everybody for attending. Thank you so much, Professor, for taking the time out today to present. I think these are all very, very interesting results. One last sort of, before we leave, we ask all our speakers for book recommendations. So if you could sort of, before you leave, quickly share like your top 3 book recommendations for the group. They don't have to be about econ policy development. They don't have to be in the domain. Just in general, 3 book recommendations, and then we'll end the session. Thank you.
Okay. In general, if you're, I think the one that I recently read was Invisible Women. So since this is about gender, I think I really enjoyed reading that book because it gave you it's more journalistically written, but it gives you a diverse, it gives you a broad overview of the different areas that one can look at. The second book, it's actually a fiction book, but I've enjoyed reading that book a lot. I've read it multiple times actually, is To Kill a Mockingbird. I think it really gives you a very deep perspective about inequality. And I think that book really helped me get a sense of what I wanted to do. I was so influenced by that book that you wanted to work, in a sector where you think that you're able to contribute towards inequality in general. But now I'm working in the space of inequality in gender. But I think that's an excellent book. And a more recent book, again, I'll recommend a fiction book, is Homegoing. It's written by an African author. I'm sorry, I'm not able to remember the name. But I think it's a nice book in general to know about history. And to see how economic institutions, it's a fiction book, but it gives you a very deep insight into how slavery trade happened and how that affected economically and socially these different areas. So these 3 books immediately come to my mind since you asked me these recommendations.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks everybody. Have a good evening. Have a good Sunday. Keep joining for more sessions. Thanks.
Thanks for inviting me, guys. Thank you.
This is excellent. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Bye.